I'm Jim Juno, and this is Lights Camera Author. If you are of a certain age, you'll never forget where you were or what you were doing when you heard the following.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
President John F. Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald on that sunny Texas afternoon, and for the first time since his killing, the closest thing Oswald had to a friend is out with a new book entitled The Oswalds, The Untold Account of Marina and Lee. The author of the book, Paul Gregory, joins me now. My guest tonight is one of the few people, probably in the whole world, who can lay claim to being a friend of Lee Harvey Oswald. And for those of us who are a certain age, the name Lee Harvey Oswald will forever be etched in our minds. If you say November 22nd, 1963, you know immediately where you were and what you were doing when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And Paul, now, I don't know if friend is the right term. Can you explain exactly what your relationship was with them?
Yes. It's sort of a long story. I'll try to condense it. I'm a native of Fort Worth, Texas. My father was born in Russia, petroleum engineer, taught Russian at the public library. So anyone who wanted to talk to someone who knew Russian would have ended up in my father's office. And so one day in June of '62, a young man, age at that time, say 23, came in, said, I'm Lee Oswald, and I speak Russian, and I would like a note from you saying that I speak fluent Russian. And my father took a Russian book off his shelf, gave it to Lee. Lee read it. Then they had a brief conversation. He did well in the conversation. My father was curious how this young fellow came to his office and invited Lee to lunch at the Texas Hotel, which is where JFK spent his last night. So they go into the restaurant, and in that conversation, my father learns that this young fellow had just returned with his wife, a Russian girl, from Minsk, Russia, and is now living in Fort Worth. That opened up an opportunity for me, who spoke Russian and wanted to improve my Russian, to meet someone fresh out of the Soviet Union. And so we went over to Lee's brother's house and met Marina and the daughter. And out of this came an arrangement whereby I would go over to their house 2-3 times a week for conversation and Russian.
Now, you said earlier before we started that you were a closer friend to Marina than Lee Harvey Oswald. I guess I'm going to be referring to him as all three names throughout the whole interview because that's how I know him. But you, in your book, you said that Marina has a natural beauty.
Correct.
And she was more friendly than Lee Oswald was.
Correct. She, for her, this was a great adventure. She was born in Leningrad. She ended up as a pharmacist in Minsk, and now she was embarked on this great adventure of beginning a new life in the United States and in Texas in particular. So for her, everything was new. The brother's house was, by her standards, magnificent. They moved into a very rundown duplex in a fairly seedy part of town. For her, that was paradise, having her own house. So she was embarking on an adventure. He was returning home. He was returning home to what he figured would be a major improvement in his life, because he had written something he called the historic diary. He thought a publisher would publish that and pay him a lot of money. He thought his knowledge of Russian would get him a good job somewhere in Fort Worth. So they both had high expectations. And that's exactly when I entered their life.
Yeah, from reading your book, I got the impression that Lee Oswald had an inflated opinion of himself.
I would agree with your reading. He was very proud of the fact that he was a Marxist scholar in his view, which began at age 15. How a 15-year-old would be turned on by Marx, I don't know. He thought he'd had important experience. He gained important experience by living in the USSR for 3 years. And remember, in those days, there was an Iron Curtain. So anyone who had lived for 3 years in Russia and had married a Russian woman, that was a very interesting thing for someone like myself.
Now he was not you didn't know him from the university. You were a student at the University of Oklahoma, and you didn't know him from he certainly wasn't a student there. But was that where you were when you first heard that John F. Kennedy had been shot?
Correct. Well, we all know the date. And at that time, we were nearing, I think we were 2-3 days off of Thanksgiving. I'd heard in the news that the president was going to visit Dallas, which neighbored Fort Worth, my hometown. I had planned to go back for Thanksgiving. The news came in as I was about to begin a class in the library. And the word came out, classes are canceled. I went to the student union where there was a big TV screen, and about 50 of us were sitting there. And we heard the news, the president had died. This came from Walter Cronkite. A little bit later, a couple hours later, they said they're bringing in a suspect. And there's a lot of activity on camera. There's a young man bloody in a white t-shirt, black eye, and I said, that's Lee Oswald.
Your heart must have skipped a beat when you saw him and you realized that you knew that person.
There was no doubt.
I mean, and you mentioned, you write in your book that you said, I know that guy, but you didn't say it very loud.
No, it was more a gasp. I think no one around me either heard me or paid any attention to what I was saying. But at that point, I was in deep shock. So it's remarkable that I even remember what I did.
And that is amazing. And the Secret Service obviously wasted no time. Once they did pick him up, I believe Marina called your father and said, I need help.
That story is as follows. Once Lee was jailed, Marina and Lee's mother, Marguerite, went downtown Dallas to talk to Lee. They succeeded in talking to Lee, as I recall. They were dropped off at the home of Ruth Payne, who was a friend of Marina. So they spent the night at Ruth Payne's house. The next day, they went back to try to talk to Lee. And then they were unceremoniously dropped off by reporters from Look magazine at the Airport Inn at Dallas Love Field. And they were left there for the evening, for the night. And around 7 a.m., my father in Fort Worth got a call from Marguerite, the mother. At first, she didn't identify herself, but then she did. And it turned out she had taken Russian lessons from my father in the library, so they kind of knew each other. Somehow she got our home phone and called and asked my father to come to where they were and find them refuge. My father said, "Okay, I'm coming." And at that point, my father called the Secret Service because the Secret Service had visited our home at like 3 a.m. the night during that night. So my father went with the Secret Service and met Marguerite and Marina at this hotel. So that's the answer to your question.
What was Marina like? Was she, I mean, during this time?
I'd say very quiet, very beautiful, heavy smoker, very thin, almost almost anorexic. A good mother. They had this infant daughter by the name of June. She was, I would say, shy. I would say we became friends because we had agreed that by my so-called Russian lessons that I was getting at their house, we would pay them for that. So at the very end, before I returned to Oklahoma, I gave her a check for $35, which for her was a huge sum of money. And at first she said, friends don't accept money from friends, but I insisted. And that told me, because she didn't have any money, that told me that she did consider me a friend.
And that really stunned me that Lee Harvey Oswald was making her make ends meet. I think you said on $2 a week.
Yeah, she got pocket money. I think $2 a week.
Which is even in 1963, that's a pitiful amount to try to make ends meet.
Well, I was an observer of their budget because I would take them grocery shopping, and I would probably take them once or twice a week grocery shopping. The end result would be one relatively small bag full of groceries. So on the basis of that information, I was able to help the Warren Commission reconstruct their budget, because the question was, how did Lee Oswald travel so much, like to New Orleans and Mexico City, earning $1.25 an hour? I can tell you that if you don't spend any money, you're going to have money for things you want to do through your savings. So he was very, very careful with the money.
Let me ask you: is there any doubt in your mind? Did he do it?
There's no doubt, and there was no doubt in my mind, even at the time when I first saw him being brought in. I was asked that question the next morning when the Secret Service came to my apartment in Norman, Oklahoma, and in the car going to the Secret Service office in Oklahoma City, I explained to them that if I were to conspire to shoot anybody, president or anyone else, Lee Oswald would be the last person I would recruit. Lee was not a follower. He was not a leader. No one would be foolish enough to follow him on such a course of action. And one of the main points I'd like to make is we tend to grossly underestimate Lee Oswald. He had a lot of traits that went unnoticed. And what was noticed was the fact that he was dyslexic. He couldn't spell. He could not graduate from high school. He could not make a success for himself in the Marines. But what I saw was a different person, someone who was very much driven to accomplish certain things, such as get yourself in the history books. He was very persistent and stubborn. He was persistent enough to stay in the Soviet Union despite the fact that the Politburo, the highest decision-making body in the Soviet Union, even though they wanted him expelled, he feigned suicide attempt and forced them to keep him in the country. He talked the U.S. consulate into not only returning his passport, but loaning him the money to return to the U.S. Whenever he had to fill out a form, he would get 10 blank copies because it would take him 10 copies before he could get one right. So this is, and by the way, we know as well that he was a very careful planner, because it's largely forgotten that he tried to assassinate General Walker in Dallas, who was a major figure in the conservative community, and he spent 2 weeks casing the joint, planning the best shot position and so forth. So he is not to be underestimated. In fact, he had all the qualifications and attributes necessary for what I would call a low-tech assassination, because the equipment for the assassination cost him around $220.
Not a small amount even for 1963.
Yeah.
Why would he want to kill JFK though? I mean, I saw in the Daily Mail that did you say that he felt like he was going to be exposed as a loser?
Could you repeat, please?
Yes, in the Daily Mail article, why would he want to kill JFK?
I don't think he wanted to kill JFK per se. He wanted to kill a major figure, and that this murder would put him in the history books. So JFK was in the wrong place at the wrong time. In fact, Marina at one point was very doubtful that he would have aimed to kill JFK, because she was quite an admirer of JFK and his family. In fact, in my presence, she spoke very highly of JFK, and Lee nodded as if in agreement. So if anything, he would be one of the last people, according to Marina, who would try to kill JFK. So it was a general wish to be something, to be somebody, to be in the history books. He was going to prove the world wrong when they labeled him a loser.
See, that was a concept which in 1963 was basically a foreign concept. Usually a political assassination was tied to politics. But nowadays, we see people doing that. I mean, with the John Lennon assassination, Hinckley and Sirhan with RFK. I mean, they killed because they want to be famous themselves. But back in 1963, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and to some extent, we have to consider Oswald as a pioneer. The two assassinations, one Walker, that's kind of made sense given Lee's purported political philosophy of being a communist and Walker being an anti-communist. So that made some sense, but JFK made no sense, particularly given the fact that Oswald would have known that by killing JFK, he would basically be killing his wife, who really had such admiration for JFK.
They even kept a Time magazine on the table showing JFK, John F. Kennedy, as Man of the Year.
Correct. The whole time I was there, and I was there multiple occasions, either having conversation within the home or driving around, driving grocery shopping. Throughout the entire period, that was the sort of the one constant, that copy of Time magazine on a coffee table in the living room. And that didn't move the whole time I was there. And if you look at the date, he would have received that magazine in Russia. So somehow he brought it with him. Some have taken this evidence and said, well, that might either show admiration or it might show some kind of obsessive fixation for him. But it was very odd, I would say.
Have you spoken to Marina since 1963?
No, I have spoken with her husband, which is the second husband after Lee. So she remarried, had a son. I talked. She made a good choice in her second husband. They live in a rural community outside of Dallas. He protects her from the press, and so on occasion, some paparazzi will get a picture of her, but this is once every decade. So I talked to the husband who answers the phone and kind of explained the situation. And he said that Marina wants to put all that behind her and really doesn't want to get into reliving these rather tragic events.
And I imagine that nowadays, well, this year, 2023, marks the 60th anniversary.
Correct.
So I imagine people are popping up again saying, we want to talk to Marina. And unfortunately, she still has to go through this every few years.
Correct. I decided the best is to leave her alone.
Was Oswald abusive, Marina?
Yes. There were two occasions that I witnessed personally. One where we were leaving their duplex and Marina fell backwards off the stoop and hit her head. She was holding June, and June flew out into the grass.
June was a baby.
Yeah, June was a baby, and Lee was shouting and abusive to Marina, and I was worried that she maybe had a concussion given the way she fell. But he was just I could hardly believe that would be the reaction, for someone who saw his wife injure herself and then berate her for being so stupid, etc. That was one occasion. The other occasion, I arrived and she had a black eye, and I was going to ask. I was naive, I was going to ask, well, what happened? Expecting, well, I hit my face on the door, but she just kind of motioned, don't ask me.
Wow, that's unfortunate. That really is unfortunate. I mean, I can't think of a better definition than a loser for Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm sorry, but that's just my personal opinion. Did he feel humiliated? I mean, I'm reading this article in the Daily Mail. It came out, and it basically said that she mocked him as being sexually inadequate.
I, of course, had no personal knowledge on that, but a friend of mine who wrote really the seminal book on Marina and Lee spent several months with Marina after the assassination, and Marina opened up to her on intimate matters, one being Lee's sort of lacking sexual performance. So it's not me that's stating this. It's Priscilla McMillan, who based it on a very long friendship and a lot of time spent together one-on-one with Marina. So I mean that could, and later on when they moved to Dallas, and by the way, it was our family that introduced Lee and Marina to what we call the Dallas Russians. There are accounts of Marina at a party or social gathering complaining about Lee's that he's not a man. He's not a man, apparently, was the word she used.
That's unfortunate. I mean, and then he takes it out on whatever nearest object he could find, and this time it happened to be the President of the United States. Now, the Secret Service got to you really quickly after they found that you knew him. I believe it was the next day.
9 a.m. The next day, they came to me and at my apartment student apartment, Norman, Oklahoma, and we drove to Oklahoma City to the Secret Service office there, and I was deposed there, and so that was my first contact. My father had much more contact because of his language ability. When the Secret Service visited him, that was 3 a.m. They came to me at 9 a.m. And by the way, they came to me with I was designated as, what was the term? A known associate. I was a known associate. I was probably the only known associate because Lee didn't know that many people. So, but anyway, they came to me as a known associate. They did understand that Marina spoke no English. And so they quickly drafted my father. And my father spent 5 days with Marina and Marguerite, the mother, in the Six Flags Inn, and he was translating for the Secret Service, trying to figure out who made the photograph of Lee with the assassination weapon dressed in black, the pistol at his side. So after the assassination, my father had a lot of contact in the Six Flags Inn with this crazy panoply of people, the most outrageous of which was Marguerite, the mother.
Yeah, the mother sounds like a real work of art.
Yeah, so if you want to understand Lee Harvey Oswald, you take a look at his mother.
What do you think when he got shot? Through your mind?
I I did see it live because you know, it was 24-hour coverage, and I think in the history of television, that's the first time they had to go to 24-hour coverage. Now it's routine. So I did see the live assassination of Lee. I figured he would not die. It would not be a fatal thing because it seemed to go in the stomach. And I knew Parkland was nearby, and the Parkland physicians could save them. So it was something of a surprise to me when I hear that he died. It didn't evoke any real emotions in me because it looked like a theater piece that's being played far, far away. So for me, it was very surreal. And it's still a little bit surreal.
I can imagine. Well, Paul Gregory is the author, and the book is The Oswalds, An Untold Account of Marina and Lee, and it is out now, and it's published by, if I don't want to get this wrong because the publisher is important.
Diversion Press.
Diversion. Let's do that
again. Excuse me, Diversion Books.
Yes, Diversion Books. It's published by Diversion Books. And Paul, I appreciate you taking time tonight to be on Lights, Camera, Author.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.